One of the risks of loving books is that they give you a beautiful way to disappear. And I say that as someone who has built a great deal of his inner life around books and around reading. Books and reading absolutely can deepen our lives. But I think there are times when they can become a way of stepping away from life. And I think that serious readers, and probably especially serious readers, don't really talk enough about one really uncomfortable possibility. And that's that we use books not to enlarge or to enrich our lives, but to avoid our life. So let me take a second and kind of like frame the issue or define something here. When I talk serious readers, I don't necessarily mean book critics or people who do serious, literary analysis, literary criticism, or, comparative literary studies, although those people are very definitely serious readers. But to me, a serious reader is something I kind of use more broadly, and defines a person more than anything else. And it would be a person who loves solitude, a person who spends a lot of time with their thoughts, a person who spends a lot of time inward and with their interior life, and that books are a major component of that. And reading is a major activity in that kind of lifestyle. And for those kinds of people, and I'm definitely one of them, I'm not pointing the finger at anyone here, books become a very comfortable place to live in. And that comfort is not always bad, but it can turn into a bad habit. And so that kind of leads to us to make a kind of distinction in how we read, or the way that we read, or even like the purpose of reading. I think it's better if we read for restoration. Reading for restoration can bring you back into your life and bring you back into reality as a steadier person. You've got a clearer mind, you're thinking a lot more clearly, and you're able to approach what could be a huge challenge in a more steadfast kind of way. Whereas if you read for avoidance, reading for avoidance, it keeps you in your thoughts, it keeps you in the book instead of acting in the real world. And so the question is not escape itself. The question is whether you come back. And the difference is really simple. Some reading restores you in your life, and some reading postpones you from living your life. So I kind of want to draw an analogy here or an anecdote from, my own personal life. If you watched my last video, I've just come back from holiday in Thailand. And I know it's a little bit cliched that, you go on holiday and you kind of have a moment of clarity, but there is some truth to it too. And I was in Thailand, and I do meditate a lot, and I try to be some kind of a Buddhist, but being away from reading a lot reminded me that what it feels like to have your attention more in the present and more in reality, and less of having my head in the clouds, so to speak. And my focus was really much more in the moment. I was focused on simple things, simple meals, being with friends, moving and traveling. I went to some new places that I'd never been to, despite having lived in Thailand for years and having visited Thailand, countless times. So there were all these kind of like small moments, and they were all very clear to me. And I really had a really kind of profound appreciation for them. And I did all of that, without reading, and it just kind of really kind of opened my eyes a little bit. And I was reading less, and I didn't feel like a failure. For the first time in years since I've had a BookTube channel, not reading didn't feel like, a failure. I felt like I was actually kind of finally living life again. And so here's kind of my main argument, I guess. And that is that the best books and the best time of reading, or the best way of reading, makes your real life feel a lot more vivid. It makes you appreciate your real life a lot more, not less necessary or not less vivid. A healthy reading life should return you to the world more awake, more refreshed, more restored, definitely more appreciative of what you actually have. And if reading is only functioning as retreat, I think that there is a much larger problem in life. And it's okay to do that temporarily. There are times where we really do just want to unplug and we really do just want to escape. But what's important is that that does not become the predominant mode and the predominant, activity or reason or final outcome or output of reading. Okay. So it's not just about having a light reading month. It's a harder question. When does a good habit become a bad habit? When does the habit of reading actually become kind of a habit of hiding from reality? The hiding from reality is kind of hard to notice, especially if you're a person who really loves reading. And like I said before, if you're a person who, lives with a lot of solitude, and if you're a person who spends a lot of time with their interior life, reading becomes one of the more respectable ways to disappear. And it's seen as like, oh, you're a serious person, you read a lot, that's really healthy. And it can look thoughtful, it can look serious, and that's just kind of from the outside. So what it really can become, though, is avoiding reality and avoiding engaging with the real world. So I think there are some signs. I sat down and I kind of thought about this. And I thought, I asked myself, what would be some signs that I could recognize for myself that I am starting to avoid reality? So here's some of them that I'll share with you, and you can feel free to comment. Let me know what you think about these, or if you recognize any of these, if you have any thoughts on this point. I think this is a very interesting point to discuss. I think if you reach for books mainly to avoid your own thoughts or your own circumstances, then you're probably reading to avoid reality or to escape your life rather than to try to restore it. And, if fictional lives start to feel a lot easier or safer or more engaging than your own life, again, there's probably some kind of deficiency in your own real life that you need to try to address. And also, if reading kind of begins to replace being present, or feeling vulnerable, if reading replaces conversations or even just actually doing things, like acting and doing the things that you literally need to do, again, probably a bad habit, and you probably need to kind of like try to dial it back a little bit. I think a good sign that something has shifted in the wrong direction is that reading no longer sends you back into life. It's keeping you from actually living your life. And, we can all chuckle about it, but I think it's a real thing. I've noticed it in my own life. There have been times in my life where I have used reading to just kind of retreat, or not going out, not making plans with people, just saying, no, I'm just going to stay home and read. It's one thing to sort of consciously say, no, I'm going to read, I'm really into this book, or I've got a book club, and therefore there's a social component to it. But if you're doing it as a way to just not do anything and avoid everything, I think that it's time to kind of try to redress that issue. And so, of course, there needs to be some nuance to this, and there needs to be some balance. So before we get upset, let me say a few more things. Sometimes retreat is necessary. Sometimes we do need that as a stress relief. It's a kind of like mental workout. We should physically exercise to make our physical bodies tired. And we should exercise our minds as well to make our minds tired and help us kind of shut off. But we need to use that as a temporary thing, and we need to use that as a restorative thing. And I think if we do that, books can become a good, safe space, and books can become a good, safe shelter, but they don't replace reality. And, sometimes fiction, it can help you kind of survive hard times. We can identify with characters, we can build kind of resilience with certain characters, and that can be a really healthy thing. But again, it needs to be applied, either consciously or subconsciously applied to our real lives and the things happening in reality. We can't live our entire life inside of a book or inside of someone else's story. So sometimes escape is not avoidance. Sometimes it's a kind of mercy, and sometimes it's a good kind of healthy retreat. So I want to close off with one more final point here, and I hope you've stuck with me this far. Reading matters to me very, very deeply. I am not putting down reading in any way. Reading to me is an essential part of life in the 21st century. It's an essential part of my own personal life, and it's an essential part of my professional life. I'm an English teacher. I think reading is an essential skill that we absolutely need to develop in the 21st century. But I don't want reading and I don't want books to become a substitute for living life. Books should sharpen your life. They should deepen your life. They should make your life better and help you appreciate your life even more. And I think that's when books are actually at their best and doing their best for you, not to help you disappear forever, but to come back to reality better, to come back more resilient, to come back with more empathy, and to come back with more appreciation for humanity. The point of reading and the point of books is not just to leave your life, but to come back and to come back better. So let me know what you think about this in the comments. Do you think reading sometimes can become a form of avoidance, or do you see it differently? I'd really genuinely like to hear what people have to say in the comments. I think we can have some great discussion. And I want to say thank you for watching if you've watched this all the way to the end. And in case you don't know, my name is Carl, and this has been Please Read Your Book.